This video we're going to have a look at Android Studio, which will be the IDE we'll be using in this particular module. So we'll briefly consider how we can download, install, configure it, opening projects, some of the different characteristics or features of the editor itself. Over time, it certainly is an environment you will become very familiar with. And it's actually quite a capable, it's a nice environment for actually coding within. So in terms of downloading it, most easy way is to go to your favorite browser, wherever you want, and do a search for Android Studio download. Normally should do it, get a link, that'll follow it through, and you can then download it from this particular page. So in terms of downloading it, there's usual terms and conditions. You can accept that, and it's reasonably big download. Okay, it'll depend on the version and when you actually do download it, but roughly about a gig's size for the one at the minute. So when you download that and install it, it'll install itself on your drive, and you can then run it. And when you run it, you'll sort of start up with a window similar to this. There'll probably be a few other configuration options along the way about the layout and the look and things like that. So this is a window here. We've got a range of options we can do for starting a new project, opening an existing one. And when you do open it and then run Android Studio, it'll open up the last one that was opened. We can import a coded example, check out something from version control that we will be doing, importing an Eclipse project. So in terms of history for this, the Android Studio was in beta for quite a long time. The first environment that they most developers focus on was Eclipse, which is another Java IDE that had Android plugin. So if you're downloading projects, you'll and they're maybe a little bit older, you'll find quite a lot of Eclipse projects. And I have to say, out of the ones I've tried, the import functionality in this is fairly good. It will pull it across from an Eclipse file into one that uses a Gradle build script that works well within the IntelliJ, the IDE that's used for Android Studio. Or you can configure and set things up. So if we wanted to start a new project, just by way of getting this going, got a dialog with a few options that we can configure in terms of giving it a name. The domain is important, so this is the means and mechanism whereby you can uniquely identify your environment. So normally you'll see in most of the ones I do, it's sort of a qub.ac.uk one, sort of EECS for specifying it, and then whereabouts it is stored. Next dialog is one that's quite relevant. So for Android development, Android works across quite a wide range of different platforms, and there's also quite a lot of different versions of Android, and they're quite frequent in terms of the iterations and pushing it forward. So you can see here that we're asked for this project, are we going to be creating an Android program that fundamentally will run on a phone or a tablet or on a wearable device, or indeed an Android TV, or some other things. So the Glass API I don't have installed here. So we're doing games. We're assuming it's going to run on a tablet or a phone. So this is the option that's relevant to us. And then beyond that, you get to choose the API, the version of Android that you want to use. And it goes all the way back to ridiculously old ones. I don't know, Gingerbread is very old. So 99.7% of devices support that. KitKat, API 19, half of devices support that. So there's quite a lot of old devices. And for this course, we're assuming API 19, KitKat and above. We'll use 22, 23 for our current versions. So let's say Lollipop, less than 1, or Lollipop 5, so about 10% of devices then are using Lollipop enabled. It's relevant if you want to sell something on the store, just by way of which devices and platforms you can target. Because we're doing a game, we won't really be using much of the APIs, the specific Android ones. So arguably a lot of things we can do, you can run on an earlier API down to say ice cream sandwich, so 94% of devices, which would be fine. The reason we'll pick the later ones is for a more sort of mundane reason, that when we look at the emulator, and there'll be another video on how we set up and use the emulator, the more recent versions of Android actually run a lot faster in the emulator. And this comes into how programs are actually run. So older sort of versions of Android prior to 5 use sort of Davlik as a sort of interpreted process. So it actually slowed, it was reasonably slow for the application run speed. So when you got to Android 5, so API anything above 20, it ran a lot faster, and that's actually convenient for us in terms of running our games as fast as we can. Anyway, so let's, we're going to create Android 6, why not, for the version of this here. So we're saying it's the minimum. It won't work in anyone under that there. It's a bit silly to use this at the minute, but it will actually scale up to the version that you're using. So we can do next. Oh, sorry, just to go back. So again, depending on what you select here, it'll pull across and install the particular version that you have identified if it needs to. Next one after that, you have a number of sort of starter templates. Now, again, there'll be another talk. It's going to have a look at how we create a game that'll be running on Android. Games are quite interesting because we're going to put in a few layers of abstraction, and the game will then notionally run on top of that. So we will use relatively few Android specific features. We'll be interested in ones that get input for touches and accelerometer. We'll be interested in one that gives us access and the ability to draw to the screen. And most often we will be drawing to the whole screen. We will control everything that is displayed in the screen because it's a game. There's good advantages to this because it means that if we take this abstracted process of having a sort of a simple thin Android layer and putting our game on top, it's easy for us then to take most of our game code and relatively easy port it so it runs in say iOS or some other mobile platform. Anyway, we're just demonstrating how you create an empty project. So we'll go for a default full screen activity. You can give it a name. So activities are the key mechanisms that sort of tie Android apps together. And we can do finish. And it'll then go and create this particular project for us. And that will come up. So you'll see Gradle. Gradle is the mechanism whereby Android Studio deals with building it and compiling it and configuring it and all of those things. It's actually quite a powerful environment overall, and it's going to help us in terms of configuring, pulling across dependencies, all of those types of things. So at this point we actually have our project set up. There's maybe just a few things to mention here in terms of what we have. You can see that by default it's sort of opened up the visual screen, and it's quite a nice sort of drag and drop one. I can drop things to this here if I wanted to have a particular layout of my API. And in Android, and again we'll look at this in a later video as well, we use XML files to describe what the interface looks like, and you can change those there, which will change the layout. Now, as mentioned, because we're doing a game, we're not actually going to use any of this here. We're not interested in setting out and adding different components to the screen. We're going to be interested in basically taking control of the whole screen and then us deciding what images that we draw to it to simulate things like buttons and other elements that we have within our game. Some other things then, I mean, it's Java is the language that we're going to be using. So again, we can go through and we can view our Java activities as well. Right, now let me just close this project, which will bring us out to our original initial screen. And we'll have a look at some of the other options that we have on this particular one here. So as mentioned, some of the things we might want to import. Open, you can open an existing project and it'll sort of give you a list of your files that are there, and you go through and you can pick it. recent projects. So Gauge is one that we will use within the course. It's, if you like, the example one that we use for a lot of the code. So I'm going to open up Gauge just by way of looking at some of the other features that we have inside this. So by way of going through the SDKs, now we'll have a look at the menus. Menus at the top, we got through files. Inside this here, we can open, we can close them. Settings, we'll have a look at in terms of some of the configuration options in a little bit. Edit, usual stuff, view, navigate, code. So again, there's a range of options here. We'll look at some of those aspects. Some of the analyze stuff actually is quite important. There's quite a lot of useful things there. So we can clean up our code, we can expect our code. Expect code is good. So you can say which bit you want to do, the whole project or not. And Android has something that's known as a lint. We'll go through it, we'll look at the code, it'll look at usage aspects, it'll suggest ways you can improve it, a whole bunch of different things. And it can be quite pedantic, but it's a useful one to run on occasion and to have a look at some of the things that it is suggesting. So you can see there, for this project, it has one Android suggestion. I actually can't resolve a particular link. It has some class structure links. So say there's some fields can be defined local, some static methods declared final, coding style issues, if statement may be replaced with that. So again, it's a useful list of suggestions as to how you can go through and potentially improve your code listings. So good to occasionally run that and to have a look at what is being suggested. Other useful things, there's refactoring. Again, we'll look at some of those aspects. For building, for running your project, and both of those. The tools then, so we have a Groovy console if we want to look at actually some of the build configurations, but Android is the thing that interests us at this point in time. So we're developing an Android program. We've got a bunch of things within this here. Now, because this one's having a look at the setup, the configuration, the thing that's relevant here is the SDK, the Source Development Kit Manager. And when we run that, we'll get a window that tells us which versions of Android we have installed. So there we have 5 installed, 6 5.1 using partially installed, other versions not installed. And I can click on these things and I can actually install different versions if I wanted to. This is useful because if we want to test our program, sometimes it's useful testing them and seeing how they'll run on a range of different versions of Android. One thing to identify here is this is quite a high level screen. Down in the Launch Standalone SDK Manager, if you click on that, it'll open up a program that runs actually outside of IntelliJ, of Visual Studio. So this is our Android SDK Manager. And I still think this is maybe a better way of being able to configure which versions of Android we have installed. So you can see for this one here, we've got a bunch of tools. Some of the things that tells we have updates available, and if I were to click here, it'll download and install those updates. And if you look at Android 6, so Android 6 said was partially installed. So the reason it said it was partially installed is that there you can see I've installed the documentation. I've installed the actual platform. You need that. You're not going to go anywhere without it. Samples, I haven't installed. And for the system images, so system images are, if you like, the way we can emulate different devices, and we'll have a talk on emulators later on. So I haven't bothered installing the Android TV system images because I'm not going to deploy for that or any of the wearable stuff. The ARM processor system image I haven't installed, it's just done for the x86 ones. And for the Google APIs, so Google APIs, if you wanted to use mapping or things like that, again, I'm not, so I haven't bothered installing them. And you can actually download the source code for SDK2. So if you want, you can install all of these. The problem with doing that is that some of these are actually very large, and you can quite easily have multiple gigabytes of stuff being downloaded and installed, generally involving lots of fairly small files, so it'll clog things up a good bit. So if you do want to add on an extra version, quite often you just need the platform that you want to install and then whatever system image that you want to run on. The rest of the stuff you can ignore. documentation, maybe just get for the key version that you're running with. And that will simplify it somewhat. Okay, so that's the key bits then about setting it up. Download it, install it, create a new project, go into the tools and just download whatever versions you want to download. Okay, so other things then within the version. So we have a number of windows over here. We can edit our code. Over here, well, we can change the particular one we're looking at, but the project one is the main window. We can look at the build script, but quite often that's just actually good to go. Inside the app then, or folder, we have a number of different things. So, assets, we could, for example, have an image asset as part of our project. Layout ones, so these are our chunks of XML, and view it as a text. Because it's a game one, it's going to be a simple layout. Values, so for example, the strings file, so again, we have some XML files. So most of the resources will live in the res folder. For us, it'll be images, it'll be sounds, it'll be some XML files. Our code, we will put within a Java folder, and we can have different directories or bits within that. And again, we can pick these things up and use them around. We can position them in different bits depending on how we want to have these things laid out. Under the manifest file, we will look at this in a later talk as well. This contains a lot of very useful, essential, high-level information about our Android app. And there's some configuration options we'll need to change within that are particularly relevant to a game. But using our project structure, we can view what we have available within our project, and this is going to be one of the key mechanisms we can navigate around and across things. Okay, so other things we want to do. Okay, so version control, again, there'll be another video on this. This is what we will want to be setting up to enable us to share the project across the version control system we're going to be using. Now, for us, it's going to be SVNs, the particular framework that we'll use for sharing it, because it'll tie into SVN servers that we have available within the school. Now, some other things then, so status bar at the bottom. Okay, yes, right. This is something you'll learn to always look at very frequently. Messages for things like indexing, finding out files when you open up a project, or Gradle doing its build stuff, will appear down at the bottom, just quite often as the line at the bottom. And sometimes it can take a bit of time for this to complete, depending upon the complexity of the project that you're using. So for example, if you open up a new project and there's a lot of things to be indexed, then you'll get a message down at the bottom that it's going through that process. Now, if you try to do something before it's finished doing that, you actually can get exceptions appearing on the screen. So it's always worthwhile looking at the bottom just to see, is the IDE doing something in the background? And if it is, this will limit to some degree what you can do in the foreground. So always have a look down there just to see what we have. Beyond this, the bit at the bottom, there's going to be sort of lots of useful information that will be displayed here. For example, to do. So if I was in one of my methods and I added in a sort of a to do comment, to add something here, it'll be the thing that'll appear in my to-do list, so I can quite easily then go in and get a list of where I have added in a to-do item for me to add it in. So to add something here. So again, that's quite a useful feature of the IDE. And there's lots of other things. Again, we'll have a look at those in some of the later talks as well. Other things, so for the editor, there's a few configuration options which are not on by default, which actually would be quite nice. Actually, you can see, so the file's indented with tabs inside of 4 spaces, so indent with 4 spaces, so there's a few useful suggestions that will automatically put. If you come from Eclipse, if you hover the mouse over something, it actually displays information about it. Now, certainly the current version of Android Studio, this is turned off by default. If you wanted to turn it on, you go into Files, down to Settings, to your Editor General tabs, And down, oh yeah, so down here inside, so editor general, show quick dock on mouse over. And if I turn this on and enable it, it means if I hold the mouse over something, it's going to bring up information on that particular object, that class, or how it's defined, how it's used. So that's actually, I think most people generally find that quite a useful thing to be able to use if you can't remember, okay, for this particular method here, what are the parameters that it accepts in. So I think that's certainly I find something quite useful. There are auto imports. So import is where you're importing in the things that it needs. When you do add in something, you'll get a message appearing, and sort of Alt Enter will enable you to select or to use it. Within settings, for our general one as well, you can configure some of the auto import options, but the default range is not bad at all. For auto complete, so if you're sitting typing around, so again, well, it's control space for this here. Any point control space will bring up a list of suggestions as to what you can add in at this point, or what seems to be a sensible way of rolling it out for completing it. Other ones, so if I click on something and it was Alt F7, it'll show me the usages of it. So if I had my success flag in this case and I wanted to work out where I actually define and use it, Alt F7 will show me the different usages of that. So again, it's quite a powerful environment by way of being able to go through and to edit these things. If I select everything, so Control I to select everything, and then go into my code, I can reformat the code and it'll change the layout. So it wasn't the default layout, more or less. I think some of the comments at the bottom, yeah, down there changed. So it'll automatically relay it out based on the layout parameters that you've defined. So again, this is a nice way of making the code look consistent. So that's probably all we want to talk about within the IDE. Reasonably straightforward, reasonably simply to install it. You download the thing, you install it, create a project, just go to your Android then and make sure you've got the versions of Android and the components of Android that you want to do. Create an empty project and just explore, looking at the different aspects within the IDE. As mentioned, there'll be loads of opportunity over the course to get really acquainted and really familiar with the IDE. So that brings the end of this particular talk. You can look forward to later ones where we will delve into this in more detail in terms of, for example, creating a virtual device through, in this case, it would be our Android Virtual Device Manager, through debugging, through looking at source versioning, but we'll break those down within independent separate talks.